Hello, thank you for coming back and watching this video. This is a continuation of the last video, the generated code using Entity Framework Core. Now, today we're going to be showing the generated code with Web API. So I'm going to fire up my AspCoreGen 1.0. As you can see, it remembered everything I typed in last time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the same database connections. I'm still going to use the linq-to-entities entity framework core for the SQL. And now I'm going to generate a new project. We're still going to use all tables here. By the way, you may be thinking, why are all the views and selected views doesn't work? The reason that doesn't work is because EF Core does not support views at the time this software was created. So if I come back here and use stored procedure instead using the classic ADO.NET, as I come back here, you'll see that these things are now clickable. Yeah, when you click any of these two selected tables or selected views, it goes right to selected views or selected tables tab. Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and go back to all tables. I'm gonna go ahead and pick Entity Framework Core. So now, as you can see, you can either just choose the tables or just generate for all the tables. So we're just gonna choose all the tables here. And so here we're gonna create a new project. I'm just gonna use the another name for it, WA, which means Web API. You could use whatever name you want. And I'm gonna use a different server port here. This port is the one the Web API is gonna be using. So when you say the HTTP localhost on top of the browser, you will see this that port is what the web app and the Web API will be using. I'm going to show you that later on. Again, I'm going to check this so that it'll generate the Web API portion of the code. And I want it to go to this directory. So I'm going to go ahead and generate that code. It should take about a minute. Now, as you can see, it will be generating 3 projects: the web application, the class library project, and the Web API project. All these projects are .NET Core 1.1. So I'm going to go ahead and close this and open up the directory where those things are generated. As you can see, that's a folder, main folder that the 3 projects were generated in, and there's a solution. I'm gonna double click the solution, and it's gonna open up the solution in Visual Studio 2017. Again, the projects generated are in the Visual Studio 2017 project. It will not work with the 2015 or older versions of Visual Studio. So as you can see, again, there's one solution and there's 3 projects on the solution. The main web app, so I'm gonna just set that as the startup project. The class library project and the Web API project. And so on the class library is shared by the Web API and the web app. So these 2 projects are referencing our business objects. And by the way, the entry point for any project to call is the business object. So whatever is in here, that's your entry point. You don't really go calling the data layer. For example, you will see that these are all internal, so you cannot really call them. They're not public. I'm gonna go ahead and close that. So I'm gonna run this, and again it'll go to our home page. Later on, when you're actually doing your own project, you can delete all the things that you don't need, but these are here so you can easily see the generated code in action. So as you can see on the very top, that's the dev port that we used here, 2730. 2730, and that's where our web API and web application is running on. Of course, when you do put this in production, it's not going to be using that address anymore. Anyway, so as you can see, I'm just going to close this bar right there. You can see there's now 3 applications or 3 projects that are generated with the addition of the web API project. The main objects that are generated for the web API are API classes or API controller classes, and pretty much seen every single one of them here. So I'm gonna click one of the views here, go back to the products view. You may not notice, but it pretty much run as fast as the entity framework, referencing the class library straight up. But this one is actually referencing the web API, and the web API is referencing the class library. It's as fast, you won't really notice a lag. You're able to add, update, delete, and we're not going to be deleting any data right now. So we're going to go right back to the project in Visual Studio, and every single one of the views here pretty much runs the same way. It's just the way of accessing the data, the flow of the data. Now the web app is accessing the web API. The web API is now accessing the business object, whereas before the web app is accessing the business objects. The reason for this is so that you can share your API, so you can share the web API to other projects or maybe other vendors. I'm going to go ahead and close this and go right back to Visual Studio. Stop the run. So I'm going to open up the controller. Oh, let's look at the view. So going back to the products, the list CRUD redirect. There's a different code here. As you may have already known, the URL is now using the web API. So if you go to the functions, get web API base address. So we're going to go there on the helper. You got your functions here. We're going to go straight to the get web API. So you can, again, you can change this later on when you go on production. There's the web API is running on this base address, the same as the web app. Again, you could do that and change this later on. Maybe you want to put this in another project, not on the same solution. You can do that. And so all you have to do is change the address here. So here is saying get the base address, which is this, and get this address right here. Products API, select skip take. So if you go to the web API controller, the base controller, if you go to products API controller, and if you go to the select skip and take, just gonna find that. If you go to that method, it shows that it returns an object, which is really all it does is it returns JSON data. It also, as you can see here, it's now accessing the business object So from the web API, it's now referencing uh, the business object, which is right here on our class library, right here, right there. And again, the business object is accessing the data layer, which is here. Not there. Over here, the data layer, that one right there. And from the data layer is accessing the data using EF Core, using the context, and that's EF Core code there. So again, the main difference between the last project that we saw is that this one is actually accessing the web API first. Then the web API then accesses the business objects. So if you go to our website and go to the product page, and if you go to the end-to-end approach, here you will see that this is the web API. This is how it accesses. From the web app, it accesses the web API controller. The web API controller accesses the business object, and the business object is accessing the data layer. Data layer is accessing the database using EF Core. And before that, if you're not using a web API, so from the web app is accessing straight to the business object, and so on. So the only difference there is that the web API is calling the business object rather than going straight here. It's going straight to the web API. So let me go ahead and close that. So that's what's happening here. And everything else is pretty much the same. When you go to the code example and look at the product example, there's some examples there on how to access the web API. When you select all, you pretty much do this. You select by primary key, you're doing this. Again, you're getting the web API base address and then the address of the web API. So everything's pretty simple there. And I think that's it. Watch out for our next video. That's it for today. Bye bye.